So this is interesting. It says here, what's next in the federal investigation into Sean Diddy Combs and his alleged co-conspirators? Is it possible that Puff Daddy, could get a plea deal on this case? Sean Diddy Combs, who was arrested this week on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, pleaded not guilty Tuesday and was ordered to remain in custody until his federal trial in New York. So what comes next for the 54-year-old music mogul? And what about the unnamed employees and associates accused of conspiring with him? That's something I ask myself. How do you have a one-man RICO charge? Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who brought the indictment, was vague when asked whether Diddy or others could face more charges. I can't take anything off the table. Anything is possible, he said. Our investigation is very active and ongoing. And I think a lot of you who cover this office know that when we say such things, the developments are certainly foreseeable. But I can't predict them but I cannot predict them sitting here today. Multiple witnesses who have worked for Combs have been meeting with prosecutors. A source familiar with the federal investigation told CNN at least one male sex worker is expected to testify in front of the grand jury in coming days, according to the source, who added the witness allegations go beyond the details of this week's indictment. So that's another question we had where we were talking about, well, is it included in the indictment? A lot of stuff that people are claiming and going off on tangents with is not actually in the indictment. And the lawyer actually, and Diddy's lawyer actually mentioned that. So, as far as we know, the only thing you can charge him with is the things that are in this indictment. So why would we then say that there's anything else that would be available? Well, they're saying here now that the witnesses, this sounds like a cleanup job in some ways, the witness, the allegations are going beyond the details of this week's indictment. I mean, either way you slice it, Diddy's in trouble, you know what I'm saying? But there's a possibility here to make a deal. Prosecutors have previously said that they have interviewed over 50 victims and witnesses in the case. CNN spoke to several legal experts to try to understand what lies ahead for Mr. Combs and for those in his orbit. It's a lot of people in that orbit. The experts do not expect a plea deal for the music mogul, noting the accusations against him could expand further. I will be very curious, especially since he's being held without bail, if that gives other survivors the courage to come forward, said Shea Rhodes, director of the Villanova Law Institute, to address commercial sexual exploitation. As for the people alleged to be part of Combs' criminal enterprise, experts highlighted the prosecution's difficult questions on whether to charge them or get them to testify against him. The prosecution is going to have to deal with witnesses with a rough past or who are admitting to engaging in criminal activity. Yes, so these other people are also going to be suspects. That's, if they want to point the finger at Diddy, they're going to have to point the finger at themselves. Prosecution is going to have to deal with the witnesses. You've got a lot of people with dirty hands in a racketeering case. What's next for Combs? The path ahead for Combs was set in motion by a series of legal decisions the past few days. Combs, 54, pleaded not guilty Tuesday to federal charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The indictment alleges he abused, threatened, and coerced women with others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. It also states that he formed a criminal enterprise that engaged in sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. That's a lot. That is a lot. But, you can go through all the cases, all the people that have accused him of things, Little Rod and all these other people, and you can pretty much name all of those crimes that are at least alleged at this point. He faces a sentence of up to life in prison if convicted of the racketeering conspiracy charge. The sex trafficking charge comes with a statutory minimum of 15 years. He will remain in federal custody ahead of his trial after his lawyers failed Wednesday in their appeal of a judge decision denying him bail. In his ruling, Judge Andrew Carter said there were no conditions that reduced the risk of witness tampering or obstruction. Combs' attorney told CNN he will again appeal the ruling. So this lawyer, like I told you before, is very hungry. He's going to figure out how to make this thing work. While many federal cases result in plea deals, Agnifilo said, that's not likely between Combs and prosecutors here. He said he planned to take the case to trial. He's going to go the whole way. I believe he's innocent of the charges, and he is going to go to trial. And I believe he is going to win. That's interesting, because the media and all the people that are reporting on it would have you believe that he is already in jail for a life sentence. You even got people now that have become comfortable and decided that they want to tell their stories about Diddy and the exploits of Diddy, when they weren't trying to say any of this when he was free, man. They weren't trying to say any of this. But, it's just interesting to see, it's not an honorable thing to talk when the bully is not, the bully is not present. You got to stand up when the bully's there. Isn't that right? Looking at a couple of y'all out there in the media. Maris said a plea deal is unlikely in part because of the 15-year mandatory minimum sentence for the sex trafficking charge. I think what the defense is really saying is, okay, we're going to take it to trial because any plea deal would be unlikely to be so favorable, she said. We're talking about charges that carry a minimum of 15 years. The idea that a plea deal is going to be something that will have a not so severe punishment is just not in the cards for this case. Further, Combs could potentially face more accusations of wrongdoing. Prosecutors have said the investigation remains active and ongoing, and they have issued a public call for any potential victims to reach out to authorities. It will be difficult for victims to come forward in this case, particularly given the allegations of violence for those who sought to speak out in the past, according to Rhodes. It's shame and fear whether or not you're going to be believed. Also, if these allegations about how he had just really engaged his entire organization in covering up what was going on, who is not behind bars that can carry out additional intimidation tactics or instill additional fear in survivors who do want to come forward, she said. Now that's interesting. Is there anybody in Diddy's organization, in Diddy's orbit, that would be an enforcer of sorts? Could Diddy be a general from behind bars? I wonder. What's next for those around him? The federal indictment against Combs alleges he was part of a sprawling conspiracy with staff, assistants, supervisors, and associates to commit racketeering from 2008 to now. It's an interesting time period they chose there. They didn't go too far back. Early 2000s, all that stuff is, I guess, lost in this, but 2008 to now, which is still quite a bit of time. According to the indictment, the Combs enterprise consisted of Combs, the leader, business entities, including his record label, Bad Boy Entertainment, and employees and associates, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice, the indictment states. Despite those serious accusations, he is the only one facing charges. Why? Very good question. Why is he the only one facing these charges? And this is a criminal operation. Now, he's done some... he's allegedly done some egregious things in the past, that would lead you to think he is a one-man wrecking ball. But this is a great question to ask. Who even would these people be? Several legal experts said the lack of charges for those around Combs indicated they may be cooperating with the prosecution. Interesting. You have other people who you could say were his enablers, who are not being looked at by the government, who are looking at helping the government prove their case, said CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson. Prosecutors could choose to grant these alleged co-conspirators immunity or non-prosecution agreements to get them to testify against Combs, Maris said. The reason prosecutors would do that is because the target in this case is Diddy, Maris said. In order to have a rock-solid case against him, information is necessary and testimony is necessary. But what about Diddy's testimony? Does that entitle him to some type of protection under the law? If he is willing to give up people that were at these parties or people that were, also victims, does he get to cut some type of deal? That's the question we need to ask. In addition, the lines between victim, witness, and offender can be surprisingly blurry. Absolutely. As we know in the alleged Cassie situation, like she was also responsible for getting some of these sex workers to the freak off, for lack of a better term. So if she was responsible for hiring them, is she a witness? Is she a victim? Or is she an offender? That's interesting. Rhodes called this the victim-offender overlap, and it's noted it's particularly pronounced in sexual violence and sexual trafficking cases. Right. In Ghislaine Maxwell's trafficking case, for example, several of the women who testified as victims said they had also recruited others to join in on the sexual encounters. Just because a prosecutor can charge someone as a co-conspirator doesn't mean that they should. Rhodes said, prosecutors could have charged one of these victims as a co-conspirator for recruiting, but that's not appropriate. So, Cassie, this deal in the public sphere, she's been known as victim. Is it possible that Cassie could be charged as a perpetrator, as an offender, even though she's made the $30 million, the settlement that Diddy wanted? Is it possible that she could also be an offender in this case? That's interesting, but I bet you she's already cooperating to stop that being a potential issue. Were some of Combs' alleged co-conspirators also victims of other violence? Yes, if we're talking about some of these other people involved in these alleged situations. The Combs indictment indicates so, stating that one purpose of the criminal enterprise was securing absolute loyalty from members of the Combs enterprise, including through acts of violence and threats. The best guide for Combs' path ahead is to examine another recent racketeering case. Which one is that? The R. Kelly case. How did you know? Nadia Shehata, a former federal prosecutor who brought the racketeering case against singer R. Kelly, told CNN there may or may not be others charged in Combs' case. Certainly, additional people could be charged. It's also possible that additional people have already been charged, pled guilty, and are cooperating in the case, she said. The fact that it's a racketeering indictment that relies on an enterprise, though, doesn't necessarily mean there will be additional people charged. For example, in R. Kelly's case, which Shehata acknowledged had some key similarities to Diddy. It's really, really close to what Diddy's going through right now. R. Kelly and Diddy are like 1 and 2, and they're even staying in the same jail cell at this point. R. Kelly, in the situation he was in during that time, was staying in the exact same jail cell that Diddy is in currently. That's what I meant. No one else was charged with racketeering. He still went to jail. At trial, some of his former employees testified against him, including the general assistant and a tour manager. Kelly was ultimately found guilty. In general, prosecutors have the discretion to decide how wide to cast their net in racketeering cases, Honig said. You can decide to just charge everyone, or you can decide to just aim for the top players here, he said. You can say, I'm going to focus my resources and attention on the bosses, the heavy hitters, and not going to weigh this indictment down with more peripheral players. And that's coming from Seattle Medium, the CNN Wire. But that's interesting. Does Diddy have co-conspirators in this one-man RICO charge? Is he going to be faced with the same issues that R. Kelly was faced with? That is an interesting place. It's interesting to think that that actually could be a possibility, that you can be brought up on a RICO and you could be the only one facing charges because everyone else is cooperating. There's no repercussions for that because not every civilians aren't on the street rule, so they can snitch away and testify away. But it does leave Diddy in a bad situation, man. But either way, let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification for all uploads. If you want to watch more, please watch one of these videos down below. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter. The link is in the description. That way you can stay up to date on all things Faucette Media, which platforms I'm going to be on, where I'm going to be next. You never know. This is Faucette Media.